following program is a presentation of YCN, your local view in the Dartmouth-Lake Sunapee region. This 2020 2nd Congressional District Republican debate is hosted by the Merrimack County Republican Committee at the Loudon Country Club. Now, the chairman of the Merrimack County Republican Committee, Scott Maltzy.
So I'd like to begin by introducing our moderator for tonight's debate. Our moderator is radio personality Keith Hansen, who is the former GOP chair in Sullivan County. You can hear Keith on the Daily Review with Keith Hansen, which can be heard weekdays from 2 to 4 on Southern New Hampshire Source for News and Talk 95.3 FM and 1590 AM WSMW. The Keith Hansen Show can also be heard on the Global Star Radio Network weeknights from 9 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Please give a round of applause to our moderator, Mr. Keith Hansen.
The rules for the debate for this evening will be as follows. This will be approximately a 90-minute debate. We get a little bit of a late start, but we're going to go approximately 90 minutes. We will draw names out of a Make America Great Again hat to determine who will go first. That lineup is already out. Questions will be asked of all four candidates. Answers will be kept to 2 minutes each. As the moderator, I may at my discretion ask a follow-up or clarifying question whereby the candidate will have an additional 1 minute to respond. If a candidate is either implicitly or directly referred to, then that candidate will have 30 seconds to offer a brief rebuttal. The candidates will have a 2-minute closing argument in line with rotation. Scott Maltzy will serve as the timekeeper. And lastly, I would like to extend a warm thank you to all of you, the voters of New Hampshire's Congressional District 2. All right, so in order of the speakers, first up, Eli Clemmer. Eli lives in Berlin, where he is a library and media specialist for the Berlin Public Schools. Frustrated by what he says is the liberal indoctrination of our youth in public schools and universities, he joined this race to help put an end to this and preserve the future of America, the world's last bastion of freedom. Please welcome Eli Clemmer. Next is Matthew Bajelabrick. Matthew is a husband, a father, decorated combat veteran, wounded warrior, veterans advocate, town of Haverhill selectman, retired Army colonel, military pilot, retired New York police sergeant, small business owner. Matt recently completed his law degree from Vermont Law School. Ready, willing, and able to reclaim our seat in Congress from the far-left special interests that have controlled our vote in Congress for 8 long years, Matt is a proven fighter and promises he will not lose. Ladies and gentlemen, Matt Bajelabrick. Lynn Blankenbecker is an accomplished combat nurse and veteran. For more than 34 years, she's dedicated herself to caring for members of the military, veterans, and their families. A Navy Reserve captain, Lynn has deployed 3 times to the Middle East, having just returned from New York City, where she served aboard the USNS Comfort in the fight against COVID-19. Lynn is also an attorney and has been admitted to the bar of the U.S. Supreme Court. She has never backed down from a fight and says she will be a strong voice for Granite Staters in Washington, D.C. Ladies and gentlemen, Lynn Blankenbecker. Steve Negrin was the 2018 New Hampshire Congressional District 2 Republican nominee and current candidate. Steve and his wife Terry raised their family of 3 in Nashua while serving many community posts involving faith and sports. Steve continues to build jobs as a small business employer at Integron LLC as a veteran and defense contractor. Steve proudly served his nation in the United States Air Force. He has served his nation in both public and private capacities for over 37 years. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Negrin. We're going to get right to the meat of this tonight, folks. We're not beating around the bush. All right, question number 1. We've all seen the George Floyd video and the subsequent rioting, mayhem, autonomous zones, destructions of statues across the country. How can we support the black community, local law enforcement, while improving race relations throughout the United States?
Okay, well, I've been speaking to this issue since I got into the campaign because we do have a problem with the culture in this country. We need to ensure that we are working on the cultural narrative that we have here in America. The Democrats, they've been trying to divide the nation because they do not believe in America. They want America to be torn down, which we've seen through all the riotings happening in the cities. The issue, we do need to have respect for police officers, and we need to have respect for law and order. We are a civilized society. That being said, when we do have police who are acting in ways that they shouldn't, there do need to be ramifications for that. But the core of it does come down to being sure we do have this respectful attitude in this day and age. But I also partially blame what's been happening with the media in this nation. We've had in the media, they've been promoting the extreme bias that we've seen, the media presenting the far left agenda, and that's just been working to tear the country apart. So we need to be sure we are working on the country's culture being fixed as a whole across all regards.
Matt Majellerbrook.
Well, in that question, you have a lot of things to break down. The George Floyd video, as a former law enforcement officer, it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to defend. Any police officer knows what positional asphyxiation is. However, I'll couch that with that there has not been a full investigation, to my knowledge, done on that. Everyone in this country is presumed innocent until proven guilty. And I think what we need to accomplish is we need to have rule of law. We should have equality under the law. Shouldn't matter what color you are, shouldn't matter what your socioeconomic status is. We're all equal under the law. And I think we've lost that. I agree with my friend here, Eli. The narrative that's pushed out, you have the rioting that started. It wasn't an initial, I think that was a trigger. And I think that was more of a coordinated effort that you saw happen in all these cities across the country almost within 48 hours of that happening. Usually, and I've been in riots when I was a New York City police officer, something that tips off like that, it generally happens very quickly and very rapidly. This was something that was more sinister, more planned, in my personal opinion. As we saw in the Democratic Convention that just ended, the Democratic Convention, not one mention was made about the violence that's going on in our cities now. These are cities that have been controlled for decades. In some cases, in Chicago, I think it's 60 years or something since they've had actually a Republican mayor. I will speed it up. Rule of law, equality under the law. How about now? All right. I'm so meek. No, equality under the law, everybody is the same. We're devolving into two tiers of justice, and that needs to stop. People who are connected or people who are, elected officials, they seem to not apply, the same rules don't apply to them, and that needs to end. That needs to end now.
Lynn Blankenbecker.
Thank you so much. So first of all, we have to listen. We have to make sure that we listen with the intent to learn. Every person wants to be heard. I do not support rioting, but I do support our First Amendment right to assemble. And that's something I've worn a uniform for 34 years. So people have the right to assemble. But there's a difference between peaceful protesting and rioting. And rioting falls under criminal activity, whether it's looting, whether it's arson. And we are a land of laws, and folks who commit criminal acts should be held accountable for those criminal acts. Definitely, the intent to learn as we listen. I'm very fortunate in my job in the United States Navy. I am the Command Equal Opportunity manager for our command. And so we have conversations all the time. And these are very easy and effective conversations to have. And we as a Congress need to set the example and lead by that example. And so by opening that dialogue, having respectful conversations about it, when I hear folks who are black and are in the military, when they say they want to be heard, they want to be identified as people who are feeling the injustice that we've seen, such as in the George Floyd event. But they are not criminals, and they don't want to be identified as criminals as such. So, that's very important to keep the dialogue and the discussion going. I think Martin Luther King did a really great job as he got the discussions going in this country. I don't support defunding the police. We need our police, and we need to continue with a strong police force, and so I don't support defunding the police, and I don't support taking away our history either.
Steve Negrin.
Thank you. Well, being the only Hispanic and being the only minority in this race, these things touch close to home. I have myself been exposed to some of these things, and while George Floyd's death was tragic, it's not an indictment against an institution. I've been asked a question about what is this cultural racism. Look, there's bad people everywhere. There's bad people that are going to do things to other people. But that's not the issue. The issue is, do we learn from those things that happen, right? When I was in the service, we had things called TTPs, training techniques and procedures. We're always compelled to evaluate what we're doing and make sure that we get better. Look, the thing that we need to realize is that we have a Congresswoman, Ann Custer, that through all the stuff that's happening, not once, not once has she condemned any of the activities that are out there. That's telling about the woman who's supposed to be representing us. And that's important for us to realize. Look, there were things that I was not able to do because I was Hispanic, right? I didn't become a victim. I got stronger for it. And I realized that, you know what? I'm responsible for my own self. Those things that happen out there, are they wrong? Absolutely. Can we be better? Absolutely. Remember, this country was founded on an idea. And remember, we say that all men are created equal, all of them. I don't need certain situations for me to start bringing that up as a topic. The left, they're not even a Democratic Party anymore, but the radical left have all these cans of Tannerite all over the country. They're just looking for reasons to see what we have in Portland, in Seattle, and what we just saw in Wisconsin. What we need is people that understand that you need to defend, not defund the police, unlike Ann Custer. Make sure that we're doing everything possible to make our neighborhood safe, and that's what I intend to do when I get to Congress. Thank you.
Steve Negrin, thank you. I would like to ask a follow-up question to all of the candidates, and we'll just go in the same order. One of the terms that's being thrown around a lot in the context of George Floyd, the rioting, the autonomous zones, the destruction of statues, the cancel culture that we have, is the term called institutional or systemic racism. When you hear that term, what comes to mind? What are they saying when they say institutional or systemic racism? Eli.
Okay. I do want to say, great idea, Steve. It's a lot better being able to stand up and have some solid foundation, just like we need to ensure that we have a solid foundation for the youth of America to learn the freedom values that we Republicans hold dear. So when it comes to institutional racism, the problem with that is America is founded on the principles of equal opportunity. It is not really possible to have equal opportunity if we are also looking to have equity where the government is the one to decide what is equal and what is not. So while it is important to be sure we promote equal opportunity for people, we do need to also ensure that we are not sacrificing our American values by having the government themselves decide what makes us all equal. That is the only way to ensure that we have a just and fair society here in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. Matt? Go.
I reject the premise of systemic racism. A racist country America is not a racist country. I don't believe there is systemic racism, because if this were a racist country, we would have never elected a black man president once, let alone twice. I believe that when you talk about things that are unfair, I think it comes down to economics. I believe that people, when they become dependent on the government, they lose their economic progress going forward. When you have groups that become dependent on government handouts that are constantly told, you need this, they pigeonhole themselves, and that prevents them from actually succeeding and taking part in the American dream. So I reject the notion of systemic racism. I do not believe we're a racist country, and I think it's a false narrative, and I think it's a dangerous narrative.
Lynn?
Thank you. Do you guys mind if I sit so I don't jump up and down on my heels in this sand? So, talk about an injustice. So I'd like to believe that there isn't systemic racism in this country, but I'm going to tell you, we're talking to 645 members of my command in the United States Navy. During our enduring conversations, they will tell you that they feel like that there is still racism in this country, and that's a problem, and we need to fix it. And so whether it's a perception of what we think of a particular culture or a particular race, or whether, we have a preconceived notion. Again, it's an opportunity for us to take the time to listen and learn about those other cultures and learn about what it is that they feel. I'll tell you, I was speaking with the Congolese students the other day who were getting ready to drive, and they said they were afraid that police officers were going to hurt them in their cars when they were learning to drive. And I said, has that ever happened in Concord? And they said no, but that is something that is shared amongst their peers. And so there is true systemic racism in this nation, whether it's a perception or a particular culture that feels it, and we just need to make sure that we have the conversation to right that.
Lynn, thank you. Steve?
No, there isn't. No, there isn't. And I have this question asked to me all the time. And I put it back to them. I said, what's your definition of systemic racism? What does that mean to you? Look, this is 2020. When I finish a conversation with somebody that I'm trying to talk to about systemic racism, I ask them, are we better today? We're not perfect, but are we better today than we were in 1960? Are we better today than we were in 1970? I lived through the 60s. I remember 1968. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. We had race riots. We are better. I'm standing before you as a congressional candidate that I don't think I could have done in 1970 or 1960 or 1950 as a Hispanic. We have gotten better. Is there room to improve? Absolutely, and we should. We should never settle for where we're at. But this is a narrative that the left wants us because it's a talking point that gets people emotional. And we need to be factual. Let's not jump the gun. Let's figure out what the things are that we can fix. Let's fix those, but let us not go down the rabbit hole and have this emotional argument with the left about the systemic racism. We're not perfect, but we're a whole hell of a lot better than we were 30 years ago.
Thank you, Steve. All right, see, we warmed up. We're off to a great start here. Get the tough questions out of the way. What do you see as the greatest existential foreign threat to the security of the United States? Matt?
Well, it depends what way you're speaking. Are you speaking economic? Are you speaking military? Are you speaking...
That's entirely up to you. What do you see as the greatest existential threat, foreign threat, to the security of this country?
I see China right now as our biggest threat. I remember getting a briefing when I was in flight school 25 years ago. Right now, China, the problem is our country, we have politicians who think the next election cycle, the next 2 years, the next 4 years. China right now is doing something called a Silk Road Initiative, all right? And they're building high-speed rails, they're building roadways to go in and have, to conduct trade with Europe. That's something that's going to displace us. And if you haven't realized now, the petrodollar, they're working on, working with Russia, they're attempting to have their currency backed by gold, and they want to use that to trade in oil. They're trying to displace us. So economically, they are very close to surpassing us, and that's something that we need to realize. We need to look long-term and think long-term for the health of our country, and we're not. By shifting our manufacturing bases overseas, we lose that, and we need to stop. And the president's right when he said we need to bring that back. And if we don't have that, like in the recent pandemic, we were actually, there was a chance that we were not going to get antibiotics from China. We had to depend on China for our own medical needs. It's unacceptable. It should never have been allowed to happen, but it's been a slow and steady decline. It needs to be reversed. So that's the biggest threat.
Thank you, Matt. Lynn?
Thank you. So I agree with Matt that China is our major threat right now. And we saw that absolutely, as he said, with the COVID crisis. You know, we know that we've always known that China was out there as a threat when it came to our cybersecurity and our intellectual property. But I feel like we have really four major threats. And so we've got China, and for all the reasons that Matt discussed, I won't rehash those. We also have Russia. You know, Russia's in a geopolitical region where they're able to really wreak havoc on us. And so China is Russia is definitely a threat. We've got Iran. Iran's got nuclear capabilities, and they are the biggest threat from a terrorist perspective. And so terrorism is still out there. As much as we like to think we've eradicated it, we've done a great job. President Trump is the closest we've come, and we've got to continue to keep him in office so that he can continue to make strides there and end terrorism. But Iran is still there. And then we have North Korea. North Korea has a nuclear capability that we have seen can reach the United States. And so we have to continue to keep a watchful eye on those, what I believe are the four major threats to this nation. Getting back to China, though, because I think China is our most immediate threat. And we've been positioning. I'm not giving out any classified information here. When I talk about, we've been positioning for a air-sea battle in the China Sea against China. They've been shutting down the streams of intercoastal, or the waterways there for these 32-second things throw us off, for trade. And so that stops trade back to, within that region and back to our own country. And so for those, I think those are the four. It's a package deal.
Thank you, Lynn. Steve?
Thank you, Keith. Thank you very much. So for a little bit before I get into this question, my background is I was an ICBM missile combat crew member in the 80s. And so my idea, of what's going on in the world still applies today, because my company still does work and I still ask to sit on boards when we talk about some far-reaching and forward-leaning kind of things. So China certainly from an economic standpoint is a huge threat to us. It's about dependencies. It's about where are we right now when it comes to dependencies on many things that we talked about, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it's manufacturing. The other one is Russia. Let us not forget that Putin was a hardline KGB guy in the 80s. He's not some nice guy that's been out there, right? He's indoctrinated. This is an opportunity after Glasnost came to be able to come back and put the Russians back on the map. So from a Russian perspective, that's a huge issue that we have to deal with. Iran, look, the president did a great thing about getting out of the Iran deal. For a lot of reasons that I can't get into right now, it was a bad deal for us because we had no insight when we're talking about what they were doing to get capability to actually produce nuclear weapons, whether they're clean or dirty. And then, of course, North Korea, because of our influence over there in the West. Look, North Korea, right, is trying to get to that point where they can actually get to us. I would just say that I don't think they're there yet, right? There's more than one thing that you need to actually deliver a nuclear weapon. There's fusing, there's guidance, there's fuel technology. There's a whole bunch of things that's out there that North Korea is not there yet. However, this president is doing everything that he can to make sure that the national security strategy that he put out in 2018 is being implemented. So if you ever have an opportunity, read the NSS because it's exactly what he's doing. And he's fighting Ann Custer every step of the way because Ann is voting against everything that he wants to do. And we got to put somebody in Congress that understands what the president's trying to do. And I'm the guy for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Eli?
So, the biggest threat to America, as I know, as you know, as America has known for quite a while, is Marxism itself. We've seen what's happened with the Marxism leading our cities to burn. We've seen what's happened to the journalist integrity in this country. We've seen what's happened on college campuses, but that is all domestic. When it comes to foreign, it is still Marxism, and it is specifically the Marxism of China. China, they've set up deals around the world. They are working to build a modern-day version of colonialism. They're trying to shut out American markets. I believe in free market ideals, but it is quite challenging to actually fulfill free market values when we have China over there. They are undercutting the price of manufacturing. They're undercutting the price of harvesting raw materials. And when they drive American businesses out of business, they can raise their prices. And they can do this because their government is helping subsidize this corrupt, cheating network that is a detriment to free markets across the world. In China, they've had a goal set for decades. They want to see communism across the globe, and they've worked to undermine American freedom every step of the way. Whereas here in America, we with the GOP, we are oftentimes too involved in the near future, too concerned with the recent elections, and not having a long-term goal. Where do we want to be as a nation 10, 20, 30 years down the road? We need to ensure we are protecting our American freedom. We need to ensure that we are stopping this socialist growth happening abroad as well as locally. And we will not allow China to become the dominant military force in the world, because if that happens, well, it's all over, ladies and gentlemen. So my answer to that question is, of course, as the others have stated, China, but it is absolutely essential we realize they have a long-term goal. They're undermining our free market. They're undermining our freedom, and they are wrecking freedom across the globe, as we've seen in Hong Kong.
Thank you, Eli. Next question is we're going to start off with Lynn. Many international economists peg the $30 trillion debt mark as the point at which other nations begin to question the integrity and the solvency of the American dollar. With the current debt knocking on the door of $27 trillion, what should the federal government have to do to not only curb spending, but to begin to whittle down a debt of nightmare proportions?
That's a great question, and thank God we have President Trump because he's done a tremendous job working on the economy for this nation, and he's going to continue when he gets back in office in 2020 to continue to get us back on that road to a great economy. So the great thing about President Trump is he's always got a long-term plan, and so folks have thought, well, his initial getting our economy kick-started really put us in debt. But, President Trump doesn't think about tomorrow. He thinks about 10 years and 20 years and 30 years down the road. And he's got a plan in place for that success. And we should always be strategically planning with our budgets. We should always be looking down the road. There are certainly ways we have got to cut spending in this country. And I really want to be on the Science and Technology Committee because I want to pull the string on what happened in China. And I think we have an opportunity for reparations there as well when it comes to what happened in China and the demise it had on our economy during that time that we had. Well, we're still sort of feeling it during this COVID crisis. But when you sit down and you look at the budget as a whole, or when you look at our economy as a whole, you've got to look at all the areas that we can make rooms for improvement, and we've got to live within our means. You just can't spend out of your means, and we certainly debt and deficit spending isn't a way to go. And so I don't think we'll be borrowing from China anymore. And I definitely think that this president, with his long-term plan, has an opportunity to get us back on track, and with folks in Congress who understand, balancing budgets and understand fiscal conservatism, we will get this back on track.
Thank you, Lynn. Steve?
Thank you. Yeah, it's a problem. And when I ran in 2018, that was one of my #1 priorities, was to reduce the debt. And all of a sudden now, unfortunately, COVID comes around and we add on top of that. Look, folks, this is going to be a painful process. I'm not going to sugarcoat it for anybody. We have out-of-control spending, and we need to do something. My grandmother used to say something very famously: you got so many gazintas and so many gazadas. And right now there's very little gazintas and a whole lot of gazadas. And we got to change that. And the point is, everything is on the table. There's no sacred cow. Everything. If we're going to turn this around, and I read a great report from the Heritage Foundation, is that we have to look at these things, and I know it scares people. We need to maintain some things that we have, but we cannot do debt reduction. We cannot get this country back online if we don't take a hard look at all the spending within the government. And when I say all, I mean Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. I'm not saying get rid of it, so everybody don't throw something at me. But what I am saying, it's a very simple equation, right? You look at how many people are putting into Social Security and how many people are taking out. Our demographics of our country, you can't change that. We're an older country, and more people are taking out than people are putting in. It's a very simple equation, but we have got to stop spending. Now, Ann Custer won't agree to a bill regardless of the amount of money it's going to cost. When we looked at this package that came out, this first rescue package for COVID, we all know the stories. All the money for these performing arts centers that had nothing to do with COVID. When I'm your congressman, it's going to be a very simple litmus test for this. If it's not COVID-related in this example, then it's not in there. But that's not what they do. Right? They do it because they're trying to get reelected. Here's what I'm telling you, folks. It's going to be painful. Everybody's going to have to participate in it, and we can turn this around. Great opportunity out there, but everybody has to buy into this, and I think we can do it. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. Eli?
So, our national debt. We all know it's very big. We've heard about it for a long time. But if we look at the numbers, $30 trillion and a country of about 300 million. Add 5 zeros. That is the amount that every man, woman, and child needs to pay to get the debt under control. I myself, that's a heck of a lot of money. That'd be hard for my wife and I to pull off. It is not so much that we have a problem in this country with taxation. Well, the Democrats say we need to tax more. If only we tax the rich. If only we tax the 1%. Well, I tell you what, if we did that, we could fund the federal government for a short amount of time. We would drive them all out of business, and we would be back in the Stone Age, financially speaking. Our problem is not one of taxation. Our problem, as we all know as conservatives, is a problem with spending. The government has grown beyond any reasonable size. The government regulates every aspect of your life. They regulate the food industry. They regulate healthcare. They have a large military structure. We have these entitlement programs, and we have all of these safety nets that only incentivize people to not go to work. We saw what happened with COVID-19 when we did provide $600 extra a week for people to stay on unemployment. Would you want to go back to work if you're making more money not going into work? We, ladies and gentlemen, have a spending problem. And a large part of that is due to the fact that if you want to get reelected, you want to give people free stuff. we need to ensure that we have term limits for those representing us in D.C. If we have term limits, then the current representation, future representation will be less concerned with getting reelected and more concerned with saving this nation for the sake of our children, our grandchildren, and being sure that this great experiment in freedom is not extinguished in the decades to come.
Eli, thank you. One follow-up question for you specifically. Since there are no term limits in place right now, would you self-impose a term limit on yourself?
I have signed the term limit pledge. I was very happy to do so. The term limit pledge includes 2 terms for Senate and 3 terms for U.S. Congress. As your future congressman, after 3 terms are up, whether it's the law or not, I am stepping down because that's what I believe in. As you've seen throughout this campaign trail, here at Clemmer for Congress, I stand by what I believe in. I do not cower away and wait until it's safe to do so after the dust is settled. I make a stand for what I believe in when it matters. So yes, 3 terms, and I'll move on to something else.
Thank you, Eli. Matt?
I heard that same report, and I heard the number is $20 trillion. That's unsustainable. $30 trillion is unsustainable. I personally see it as 2 choices. The federal government is printing up money. They started with QE1, QE2, quantitative easing. Our currency is a fiat currency. It's not backed by gold. It's not backed by anything tangible. Okay, so our currency is not a hard currency. No currency in the world right now is a hard currency. They're all fiat currencies. That means they're backed by nothing but the faith of the government that prints it. So the choices for America are going to be
They're going to be 2 simple choices. You're going to do a hard default or a soft default. What happens in a soft default, they keep printing up more money. And the money that you have and that you've saved your whole life that's sitting in a 401 is worth less. Okay? That's what's happening. That's the biggest scam pulled on the middle class. The second thing is a hard default, which no one wants to do because no one has the guts to say we need to do what needs to be done. But the bottom line is it's like me taking out a $25 million mortgage and making the first payment. I may make the first one, but I'm not making the second. What is the alternative? That's where we're at. That's the reality.
It's either a soft default or a hard default. And those are and like Steve said, he's absolutely correct, and Eli, 100%. You have to reduce what you spend. You cannot spend more than you take in. But right now, this situation is untenable. And they're artificially inflating our markets. Right now, thank you. Right now, our stocks are at the highest levels they've ever been, just about. But if you look at it, they're not producing any more widgets. They're not making any more things. What they're doing is they're taking that cheap money, and these corporations are buying their stock back. So what they're doing is they're making their stocks appear worth more, when in reality, it's just a game. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And the next question is for Steve. Most Republicans and certainly conservatives believe in free trade. What are your thoughts about using tariffs as economic weapons?
I wouldn't classify them as weapons. I would classify them as trying to level the playing field. For far too long before President Trump came in, we were at a disadvantage when it came to trade, right? Because they used trade as an offering for the United States to deal with foreign countries. The one great thing about this president is that he's a businessman, and he understands what the issues are when you're talking about dealing with other countries. You know, one of the things about President Trump, and he's shown that, is that he wants to put and make sure that our country and our manufacturers get a fair shake, a fair trade. And we saw that we were upside down in many areas. You know, there was the story about, I think it was Ford or General Motors was going to move a factory to Mexico. And the president went down and says, okay, you can move them now, but I'm going to put a 35% tariff on the way back. They stayed. So the point is that I wouldn't necessarily classify it as a weapon, but I do want to make a level playing field for the manufacturers and the people that produce goods in this country, because for far too long we've been upside down. And what we need to do right now is make sure, and people think that what our president's doing is draconian, but it's not draconian, because if you look where we were when he started, we were like this, and now the president's just trying to get here. And I think once you get fair trade, he's not trying to gouge or steal or take anything away from another country, but what he is trying to do is make a fair trade for car horns so that they work when you buy them. Thank you.
Okay, well, what do I think about tariffs as economic weapons? It is absolutely valid, especially in the modern day where economics is used as a tool of modern warfare. I do believe in free market principles, but as I said in that prior question about China, it is hard to have free markets when one side's cheating. You're playing a sport and someone else goes out and starts cheating, helping the other team. Do you really want to play that game fairly? You're going to have to actually say, no, we are setting the ground rules. We are enforcing the ground rules. We are going to have a fair game in this situation. So, tariffs. If we are using tariffs as a way to help equalize this unfair cheating that's been happening by these socialist countries in China, it is absolutely valid. Otherwise, for here in America, I do believe in providing free trade opportunities. Part of the reason why America has become such a profound success in the economics of the world, we support our businesses. We need to ensure that we continue to support our businesses and we protect them from unfair practices abroad. We also need to be sure we are having the best entrepreneurs here in the United States, and when we have our intellectual properties being stolen and not being respected across the globe, that is another reason why it is fair to say, you're not playing fair, we're going with the tariff route. And Donald Trump, it's been a bit controversial, but it's been a very good financial success, and I'm very much looking forward to helping support President Trump and continue to ensure that we demand fair economic practices throughout the world.
Thank you, Eli. Matt?
On its face, I don't like tariffs. I believe in free trade. I think free trade is very important, but the reality is it's kind of like term limits. Intellectually, I'm against them because it takes away the right for you to vote. But in reality, it doesn't work. I mean, right now, Congress has like an 11% approval rating, yet 98% of them get reelected. That's like going to a restaurant 5 times, getting food poisoning 4 times, and going back again, hoping for a different outcome. It's just not reasonable. I see what the president's doing. He is trying to level the playing field. China got brought into the G8, and they got most favored nation trading status, I believe is the term. And the first thing they did, they artificially lowered their currency to unfairly compete with the United States. God bless you. And and so what that did is that made manufacturing in China incredibly cheap. So all the American corporations jumped on top of that. And when they did that, we lost our manufacturing base. And that's why you hear the terms thrown around Rust Belt, because all the manufacturing areas in our country now are decrepit and they're rusting. So that's a once around the world on tariffs. So tariffs can be used. They can be an effective tool. For example, when I was a police officer, I flew for the aviation unit. We looked at Eurocopter as opposed to Bell helicopter. And the prices that Eurocopter could come out with was amazing, because Boeing and Bell, they all stand on their own. They're private corporations that don't get any government funding. But yet Eurocopter is 35% of their income comes from the government. The French government actually subsidizes that company. So it's inherently a very unfair playing field. Thank you.
Thank you. Lynn?
So I agree with all 3 gentlemen here that I don't think it's an economic weapon. I think our president did a great job drawing that hard line in the sand when it came to tariffs. And, he did level the playing field, and that's exactly what we need for free trade. I don't really have a whole lot to add to all the arguments that have been made today, as we've been sitting here, because, it just is, So yes, the president's drawn the hard line in the sand. Tariffs work. We've seen the playing field leveled. Let's keep free trade going. I think it's a great start. The president's done it in other areas when he, when he drew the hard line in the sand over in Syria, and he's drawn the hard line in the sand from a military perspective. And this is a president who just continues to put America first, and those tariffs do put America first.
Thank you, Lynn. All right, this round of questioning is going to be led off by Eli. Eli, election integrity is one of the most important aspects of maintaining our constitutional republic. What legislation would you support to enhance voter integrity, and do you feel that mail-in or absentee voting is a threat to that?
Well, as we are all aware, election integrity is important both on a national level, as we're concerned with the Democrats trying to yet again cheat our elections. What was in 2016? Hillary Clinton said that we absolutely need to respect our election outcome, and we need to be sure Donald Trump is going to respect that. Donald Trump won by a landslide. Hillary Clinton, he rigged it. So election integrity these days for 2020, they want to get mail-in ballots for every American. And if we're talking Democrats, they're going to want some dead Americans and some illegals to vote as well. The problem with mail-in ballots is it is no way to verify the identity. You do not register ahead of time with your identification the same way you do with an absentee ballot. However, in addition to what's been happening federally and nationally with our elections, we have an issue here in New Hampshire itself with our election integrity. We have establishments here in New Hampshire that are trying to deprive the voters the right to choose their Republican candidates to send up against Ann Custer. You've probably heard the fact that WMUR themselves have neglected to admit that there are 4 candidates in this race. Adam Sexton, on air, lied to all of New Hampshire in saying there are 2 candidates to choose from. He's refused to take my calls. He's refused to take the calls of those who support me and my volunteers. And I've heard that's a very similar situation for good Matt over here. We need to ensure that we are protecting our elections both federally and locally. We have allowed the media to corrupt this nation, and I am saying we need to say no more. The media's bias, the media's rigging of elections must end, and we need to have fair elections across America. I don't know what's wrong with Adam Sexton. Does he think that volunteer effort's not enough? Is for Adam Sexton only concerned with campaign finances? Because my campaign, we have thousands of hours of volunteers who've put in their hard work and effort for what they believe in. Thank you.
Eli, thank you. Matt?
Election integrity. It's funny. If I wanted to go in there and have a beer, I'd have to show an ID to buy a beer. Yet, if you went to the Democrat convention, you'd have to show ID to get in the building. But that's acceptable. If you want to buy Sudafed tonight before you go home, if you have a cold, you got to show ID. But yet, one of the most important things we do as Americans is vote. And it's just fine. Come on in, say who you are, and we'll just trust you. Absentee ballots, I have no issue with because that's, in the pilot world, we call it a two-way positive transfer control. I ask you for an absentee ballot, you send it to me, I send it back. So that's fine. I see nothing wrong with that. What I don't like is the mailing out of 8 million ballots to P.O. boxes and people who've been dead for 15 years, and now these ballots are floating around. And then you have ballot harvesting where people go around and they pick up all these ballots and they just turn them in wholesale. That is rife for fraud. I believe last election cycle, they locked up a postal worker who had several hundred ballots, and he was actually modifying them. So, I mean, it's something that we have to really be careful of because the most important thing we do is vote. And I think part of it is people should pay a penalty. If someone is convicted of voter fraud, they should actually go to jail. I mean, if you make the penalty enough, then people won't take that chance. But absentee ballots, I have no problem with that. That's fine. The wholesale mailing of ballots, absolutely not. And I agree with my friend Eli. WMUR is really kind of putting the screws to him and I because they're acknowledging 2 candidates in the race. There was no polling done. They said we don't meet the criteria. Well, he's a highly educated educator, and I'm a retired colonel. So I don't know. We're both qualified, registered candidates. So I find it really funny that they just exclude people, and that's an example of the media putting their thumb on the scale. Don't let them do that. We're 1.4 million people in this state. We should be able to say no. Thanks.
I would like to point out one thing, and that is that the Merrimack County GOP and YCN did not exclude either Matt or Eli. So. They did not.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Matt. Lynn?
So, can you guys hear me? Okay, there we go. So my team and I have been going door to door for months now, knocking on folks' doors and meeting voters that are out there. And we go to a door, and we have this app everybody's familiar with it, the Advantage app. And you knock on the door, and you say, "Hi, is this Mrs. Smith?" And they're like, "No, Mrs. Smith moved 2 years ago. I'm Mr. Jones." And that is exactly why we cannot have mail-in ballots, because you're going to mail them to the people who don't live there. And so I have seen more error when I am out there and going door to door, knocking on doors, than I actually actually see the real people that live there. So that's problem number one. We can't have mail-in ballots because we can't verify and identify who really lives in that house. And, you know, when folks are getting 3 ballots because they have 3 people identified and somebody died in the house or maybe somebody moved, now there's extra ballots in the house. I am a proponent, just like my colleagues here, of absentee ballots. You know, it's a great system. It works well. I've been in the military for 34 years. When I sat over in Afghanistan, I voted by absentee ballot. There's a process, it's verifiable, and it works, and our votes get counted. And so there is no need to have another process such as mail-in ballots when we have a process for people, especially right now, who may not feel like going out to vote because they're afraid for COVID, or maybe they're just, you know, wanting to protect themselves and they don't want to go to the polling stations, but they absolutely can request an absentee ballot. And I absolutely believe in voter ID. You should be able to, you should have to identify yourself when you go in to vote. And you know, you hit the nail right on the head. You have to show an ID to do just about everything else, and yet you don't have to have an ID to go in and vote. It's an important, oh, I thought you were giving me time. It's an important, you know, right that we have as individuals, but it's not a right that, you know, I can take from somebody else. And so we should be showing IDs as well. And I would support voter ID from a national level.
Lynn, thank you. Steve?
Thank you. This is near and dear to my heart because when I was in the State House, I sat on the Election Law Committee. And this was something that was talked about a lot. Look, I'm not a big proponent of big government telling all the states how to vote, right? The states have the right and the obligation to determine how their people in their state vote. That's their job, and that's what should happen. The problem is you can't let Democrats take over the House, and you can't let Democrats take over the Senate, because they're going to propose some craziness like this mail-in ballot stuff. It's nuts, right? Tim Lang, right there. Timmy, raise your hand. Tim is on the Election Law Committee right now, and so they're fighting it as we speak today. Look, as a federal office, I'm not a big proponent of telling all the states what to do. Do I believe that you should have an ID card or something to prove who you are? We fought very hard to determine domicile and where you live in residency when we were in the State House to try and offset some of the things that were happening at college towns, right? I voted absentee the whole time I was in the service. It's not hard. It really isn't. But the rhetoric you used to hear from the left was that you're disenfranchised. I never heard that word before until I was in election law. I never knew what disenfranchised meant. The issue is that everybody has a right to vote. It's their God-given right to vote in this country. We need to protect the vote. I used to say at the well, we're not trying to prevent the vote. We're trying to protect the vote, because one illegal vote cancels out my legal vote, and that's the problem. So the states, you want to fix the problem about voter integrity, you got to win the House, you got to win the Senate here in the state, and that's how you control it. It's not a federal mandate, and let's get out and vote and take the House back in the Senate. Thanks.
Steve, thank you. Okay, now the next question's a long one. Under the provisions of RSA 159.26, the state of New Hampshire retains exclusive authority and jurisdiction over the sale, purchase, ownership, use, possession, transportation, licensing, and permitting of firearms, firearms components, and ammunition. This effectively prevents New Hampshire cities, towns, and counties from enacting gun ordinances that are more restrictive than that which the state has enacted. Should the federal government enact a national equivalent to 159.26 that would prevent states as well as cities and counties from enacting oppressive, sweeping gun control policies like that of the states of Illinois and New York and the cities of Chicago and Baltimore? Matt, that question goes to you.
That's actually a great question. The Second Amendment rights is a Second Amendment right. Yet driving is a privilege. It's not a right. But yet your New Hampshire driver's license, that privilege is extended to all 50 states. But your Second Amendment right is curtailed at the border when you go south to Massachusetts. So I absolutely 100% would like to see a national carry law. I mean, of course, you know, with the provisions just like we have today, you go through a background check, and if you, like in this state, if you are constitutionally allowed to possess a firearm, then you should be constitutionally allowed to carry that firearm. And I believe that your constitutional rights shouldn't stop at the Massachusetts border, and that's what it does. So it's disingenuous to have your driver's license be okay in 50 states, but not your constitutional right. So that's something that needs to be addressed. So 100% I'm behind a national law that would codify everything and make it equal.
Thank you. Lynn?
So I agree with Matt with the national carry, of course. You can't, if you're going to cross state lines and be a felon in one state, and especially inadvertently like we have in New Hampshire where we border so many areas and we're such a small state. But to the point with the question that you asked, when you purchase a product, because that goes into fining and taxing as well, right?
It does, correct.
Yes. So when you purchase a piece of ammunition or a gun or whatever, in one state, and it's more overly restrictive in another state, then you're going to have everybody flocking to one place where they can get everything, without having the taxes or the restrictions, and then you're not going to be able to get it across the states. And so I would support a national law that levels the playing field, makes it all equal. And I do believe in the 10th Amendment. I believe in the states' rights, but the Second Amendment is not up for grabs for states' rights. It's codified. We have it as a Second Amendment, as an ability to be able to keep and bear arms and to not have the states infringe upon that. And so I would support a national, such a law nationally. Federal.
Okay. Lynn, thank you. Steve?
I'm good. That's a tough question because, again, I'm not a big federal government guy. And even though in spirit I believe that you should be able to go across state lines, the states have a right to determine what it is that they want to do with their firearms. What's interesting to note is right now in Ann Custer's committee, there's a bill called House Resolution 5717. And what she's proposing is that there is a 50% sales tax on all ammunition, federal sales tax, a 30% sales tax on all guns and long rifles, and a national registry for gun owners that's retroactive. We saw what happened in New York, and I wrote an op-ed that ran in the paper, is that they took everybody that was on that registry and published their names in the newspaper so that everybody knew who had a weapon and who didn't have a weapon. This is the congresswoman that we have. This great state of New Hampshire is an amazing state because we're law-abiding gun owners. And that's the way we want to keep it. So this RSA is here for a purpose. If that RSA needs to change, it's got to go through our House and our Senate. But we have a federal congresswoman that's trying to enact a federal law that will overreach and usurp this RSA because that's what she wants. That's what those gun grabbers want to do. You got to think very long and hard what's going to happen on both September 8th and November 3rd. The reason why this state is so great is because we know what our responsibilities are. Don't let the government tell us what I can and can't do with my weapons. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Eli?
Well, it's quite simple. Rather than beating around the bush, I'm going to get right to the point. Shall not be infringed. I don't know about you, but when I hear shall not be infringed, I hear that there should be no regulation and that we should have open ability for U.S. citizens to have their God-given rights to keep and bear arms. No reason needed. Not necessarily about defending your family, not just about defending against tyranny. It is your God-given right to keep and bear arms to defend yourself for whatever reason needed. We have situations here in New Hampshire. If you're down by the southern border, we are very gun-friendly in this state, but Massachusetts, not so much. You could be accused of a felony if you cross the wrong side of a parking lot down south because Massachusetts bans certain guns that are legal here in New Hampshire. Massachusetts has a very draconian system to be able to keep and bear arms and conceal carry down south. We absolutely need to ensure that Americans who are enjoying their God-given rights are protected throughout the nation. I myself, very big on Second Amendment. It's not too hard to do that here in New Hampshire because we have some very understanding and protecting the Constitution laws about that here in this state. However, I do just want to ask a question of one of the other candidates. It could just be me, but it seemed that Lynn Blankenbecker seemed to say that other people come to New Hampshire to purchase firearms because they don't have to pay taxes and they don't have to adhere to the regulations that their own home states have on firearms. I'm curious if she really does think that is the case, because the law is handguns, you need to buy in your home state. Long guns, if you buy a long gun, it needs to be legal in the state you're purchasing as well as the state that you reside in.
No, Eli, I didn't. Thank you for that. No, Eli, I didn't say that. I said it could set up a situation, and I don't want to set up a situation like that.
Maybe I misheard, but thought you said there's people coming over to buy guns that don't require the taxes and also do not have to adhere to the regulations of their home state.
Right. Well, I said it would set up a situation.
All right, thank you very much. All right, the order for the next line of questioning will be Lynn, Steve, Eli, and then Matt, just as a reminder. The next question actually deals with the previous question. The previous question is a perfect lead-in to the question about states' rights versus federal power. What is your opinion of the role of federalism in the United States Constitution? And as a member of Congress, you are representing New Hampshire citizens. How do you plan to protect the rights of the citizens of New Hampshire in Washington, D.C.? Lynn?
And so I'll always put New Hampshire first. It has to come first. We only get 2 representatives in this state. And so it's really important that we make sure that our representatives are always committed to the state of New Hampshire and that we do put New Hampshire first. When I was in the House of Representatives and I served from 2009 to 2012, I represented a district, and sometimes I did deviate from what the party wanted or what others wanted me to do. But I always kept in mind that I represented my district first. And so I did stand strong for my district, and I'll continue to stand strong for New Hampshire when I'm in D.C. But it's important that we support our governor and that we support our state and that we support the initiatives that our state wants. And sometimes those have to filter up to the federal level so that we make sure that we get them the support that they need from that level, whether it's passing gun laws or refraining from passing gun laws. And I'm not a person who believes that we should be passing too many laws in D.C. I actually think we should take away a few before we start adding some more. We've got way too much going on up there. So always we'll put New Hampshire first, and we'll definitely protect the 10th Amendment.
Lynn, thank you. Steve?
Absolutely. I think you've heard me a couple of times up here that I'm not a big believer in a big government. I believe that the states, because of the 10, says that all those powers not reserved to the federal government belong to the state. Many times the federal government wants to reach in and try to dictate to the states, and I saw this firsthand when I was in the state legislature, and it is a balance, right? One of the things that I used to talk to Governor Sununu about was that he doesn't have any help down in Washington. He cannot pick up a phone and call down to the congressional delegation and get any help. And part of it is a partnership between the governor and representatives as they are in Congress or in the Senate. So absolutely, I believe that there's a role of a relationship between the federal government and the states. Having been a state legislator, I understand that I don't want big government telling me what to do, but there has to be a relationship. I think the governor knows my role, and I've talked to him often that if and when I get elected to Congress, that I'm going to be a person that he can pick up the phone and we can help things collectively. What is it that we can do? And one of the great things about my relationship with a lot of the state representatives that when I come back home, because that's something Ann Custer doesn't do, she doesn't come back home to talk, is that we'll sit down with the legislature and the friends of mine, because we have that relationship, is what is it that we're trying to do for the state? What is it that I, as your representative in Congress, is trying to do? And I think that kind of two-way conversation is going to be both beneficial to the state and for me as a congressman. Thank you.
Steve, thank you. Eli?
I've spoken on many occasions the importance of states' rights. We have the federal government is set up. It is supposed to keep the peace between the states, deal with interstate issues, but the fundamental purpose of government is to protect the people, protect their livelihoods, uphold the laws, but most importantly, protect our liberty. Unfortunately, government likes to grow, and so we've seen the government grow beyond reason. When you have the federal government setting policy on education, setting policy on healthcare, setting policy that affects all the states. They have a one-size-fits-all model. Well, I'll tell you what, 50 states, New Hampshire, California, very different situation, very different needs, and we know how to custom tailor New Hampshire's needs when we set our laws on the state level. But the federal government, one size fits all. We need to ensure that we restore power to smaller levels. We need to reduce the power of the federal government. We should ensure that the states have more ability to set their own laws. Local communities are able to set how they wish to run themselves, and how the individual American is able to choose his or her path in life. We also need, okay, 30 seconds. So anyway, local control, we know our own needs. We also have the benefit of being able to have a free market of ideas when we let the states choose their own paths. We have 50 states. Why not allow each state choose its own education system, and we can see what works and what doesn't? It allows for the free market of ideas. It allows for the cream of the crop to rise to the surface, and it allows us to be sure that we're preserving liberty for every single American. The federal government absolutely needs to be returning power to the states.
Thank you, Eli. Matt?
Yeah, federalism. When our country was formed, the idea was that the federal government would be a weak federal government and the states would be strong. That's the reason for the 10th Amendment. I believe that a government that governs best governs least. I don't like being told what to do. I don't like being micromanaged. And that's what's happening now in the federal government. It's grown beyond proportion. It's an organism. I mean, like any organism, what's its prime directive? It's to consume and to grow. And that's what's happening with the federal government. Do you think the Founding Fathers could have ever devised of such an idea as the IRS? I mean, that is just one agency that's an example that they're judge, jury, and executioner. If anybody here has ever had an audit, I can assure you that they will make all the decisions and they will mete out the penalties. That's not how our system is designed. And what happens is now you have unelected bureaucrats. Lois Lerner, perfect example. She basically suppressed conservative speech for that whole election cycle in, was it 2012, I believe, when Romney was running. And it went unchecked. So that's an example of that a federal government that's too large. It has very specific things in the Constitution. It mints the money. It provides for the national defense. It controls immigration and a few other things. That's it. It's grown beyond proportions that it should have. The state should be strong. The state should be dominant. And the one big thing I want to point out, everybody in New Hampshire should be really afraid when they start talking about getting rid of the Electoral College, because this last COVID bill that just went through, we got $1.8 billion. Congratulations, Annie Custer. Thank you so much. That's the minimum that any state got. So when she goes around parading that she did so wonderful for our state, there you go. Bare minimum, that's what we got. So if we didn't have an Electoral College, we would be part of the flyover. Presidential candidates would go to New York, California, Florida, and Texas. See ya, and that'll be it. We would have no representation. And they're talking about packing the court, and they're talking to make D.C. a state, so they'll add 2 more senators and water down our representation. Needs to stop. You should be afraid of that. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is a 3-part question. We're going to throw this off to Steve first. What current or former members of Congress do you feel most aligned with, both philosophically and legislatively? What are the policies that they've championed that resonate with you most? And what, if any, caucuses would you join?
Well, the first one's very easy because I've actually met Representative Jim Jordan. I was with him in Ohio, and I was out there to do some fundraising, and I actually met a colleague of his who was actually ran for the governor of Idaho. And the reason why we had a conversation is this guy was a founding member of the Freedom Caucus, and he's actually a guy from my hometown in Puerto Rico. So I called him up and I said, I understand how I got to New Hampshire. How did you get to Idaho? Which was a great conversation. But look, we saw what Representative Jordan has done even during the impeachment hearings. He's a true patriot. He understands, and remember, he moved from the judiciary to the intel, or vice versa, because he was such a pit bull for the president. So right now, the guy that I want to emulate the most, and I would absolutely join the Freedom Caucus, because if I was asked, is to do that because I believe he's got the same kind of beliefs and ideas that I do. He represents his folks in Ohio very, very well. And so it's Representative Jim Jordan for me in the Freedom Caucus.
Thank you, Steve. Eli?
I myself have a tremendous amount of respect for Senator Josh Hawley, as well as Senator Ted Cruz. They are pushing the fight to ensure that we have freedom in the decades to come here in America. Big issue I've been discussing since my campaign launched in January is ensuring that we have freedom of speech both on and offline, and that we are also stopping the propaganda machine that our American universities have created. Conservatives, like it or not, we are being censored on the internet. And the reason why this matters, the liberals, they've got a pretty good setup. They control the entertainment industry. They control the news media. They control the colleges. They control the publishing houses, and therefore they control the cultural narrative of our nation. But the internet is our ability to get our voices out to America's youth. Because I don't want to see our children and our grandchildren raised to be little socialist activists that we've seen burning down the cities. Senator Josh Hawley, Senator Ted Cruz, they've been focusing on protecting our freedom of speech online. There's an institution, Prager University. Their goal is to promote conservative ideals to America's youth. I have a colleague who has shown Prager University videos to her students to show them the merits of capitalism when they're discussing capitalism versus socialism. Prager University, no inappropriate content, no language, no sexual content, no violent. It is made to be educational for children. And yet, YouTube and YouTube's infinite wisdom, they've seen, hey, Prager University, this is reaching out to America's youth, and this is helping them see the conservative message. Let's ban it for anyone under the age of 18 because we say it's not appropriate for children. That is the reason why we need to ensure freedom of speech online. And that's what Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Josh Hawley are standing up for. And that is why they're the two that I am going to go down and help them continue that fight and ensure that we protect our freedom of speech for every American on and offline.
Thank you, Eli. Matt?
Well, I want to thank Steve and Eli for taking two choices. I'm sitting here. How sad is it that I actually had to sit and think, and I had a hard time thinking of somebody that I would want to emulate. I think we have too many Republicrats in office. And it's true, and I don't mean to be like derogatory, but it's like you can't tell the difference between these two animals, and that should not be the case. In answer to your question, I would say former Representative Trey Gowdy, I think. I admired him for how he acted. He was relentless in pursuing the Benghazi issue, and I was actually deployed, and I was in the embassy in the UAE watching a live feed of the attack. So when I hear people testify as to what went on, that was a lie. I was there, and I saw it, and I watched it. And for them to say there were no forces available, that was a lie. And that was one of the most disappointing times in my 33 years in the military that I was ashamed of what happened and what our country didn't do for our soldiers. But I digress. We can't, you have to be able to tell the difference. Nobody is speaking up about the violence going on right now, very few. And I like Hawley, but let's call it what it is. Hawley just got elected. He's got 4 more years to go. So where are all these other heroes? Who's advocating for us? You know, I'm a former infantry commander. I could defend myself. I could defend my family. What about the people out there who can't? You know, and that's who I'm concerned about. And that's who they should be concerned about. And they're not. They're only concerned about getting reelected. And that's what needs to stop. And people need to wake up and realize that these people who you're putting in office are not there to serve you. They're there to serve themselves. It needs to end. Please.
Thank you, Matt. Lynn?
Well, I have a lot of members of Congress that I have a lot of respect for, and most of them have endorsed my campaign. So I'm going to start with them in bins. So my first bin is my veterans, and that's Dan Crenshaw, Michael Waltz, and Michael Gallagher. Those are three veterans who have endorsed our campaign, and their goal is to make sure that we bring that military ethic to Congress to get rid of the corruption, right? We got to get folks that can know how to work together despite our differences so that we can accomplish a common mission. So for me, same oath, different mission, and I want to join with Michael Gallagher, Dan Crenshaw, and Michael Waltz when it comes to cleaning up Washington. Elise Stefanik. Elise Stefanik did a tremendous job, not only as she defended our president during the impeachment trials, but she stood up for women and gave women a voice. Did you guys realize that our Congress right now in the GOP is about 94% male? And so it's very hard for a female in Congress who is in the GOP. The Democrats are about 66% male. And so Elise Stefanik, even at her young age, has stood up and been that female leader. And I'm looking very forward to working with her as we advance women's issues. And there's a lot of issues going into Congress right now that are impacting women. And so I look forward to working with her. The Doctors Caucus. There are only 13 members of Congress right now that have any health care background. I'm getting my 30 seconds already. But been endorsed by Andy Harris and members of the Doctors Caucus. It's a bipartisan caucus and working on health care reform for all of us. I don't know how you can send somebody to Congress that doesn't have any health care background and expect them to navigate the health care problems we've got today. And finally, the Problem Solvers Caucus. Tom Reed and Dan Muser have both supported my campaign, and part of the Problem Solvers Caucus, there's 58 members working together, bipartisan, to get work done on our behalf. Thanks. I'm out of time.
Thank you. And not a single person said Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. All right. Final question. And these are two questions that are very near and dear to my heart. First question, or the question first goes to Eli. What does conservatism mean to you, and how do you define the word liberty?
Conservatism, the founding principles of our nation. The founding fathers believed in freedom. They believed in having their own ability to set their path in life. The government has no inherent power. Our rights are God-given, and we grant power to the government. It is by our willingness to give up our power that government is formed. Conservatism, we believe in these traditional ideals. We say no to the modern socialist notions of equity, where there is some individual stating what is fair and what is not. Every man and woman is created equal. Liberty, the ability to set your own path in life. The ability to know that you have your inherent fundamental God-given rights, and nobody has the ability to take those away from you. Not the government, not foreign nations. They are for you yourself. We must be sure we preserve that, because who knows what's best for your life? The government or you yourself? We know our own needs. We know our own stripes. We know the life that we want for our children as well as our grandchildren, and we should be able to have the rewards of the benefits of the labor we put into this world, rather than letting the government tell you what to do, telling you what to say, telling you what you should do with your life. I believe in the right to choose, and that is the American way, and what the founding fathers of this nation believed in strongly enough to put their lives on the line, and for far too many, paid the ultimate sacrifice to preserve.
Thank you, Eli. Matt, what does conservatism mean to you, and how do you define the word liberty?
Conservatism, like Eli said, it's one of our founding principles in our country. But more importantly, it places the value of the individual over the collective. Individual rights are very sacred in a conservatism belief. And I feel that liberty and freedom are intertwined, and they're immutable. They are one. When you think of the ability to set your own station in life, to make your own way through life and not be told what to do, not be part of a collective where you're forced to do something that you don't. This country was founded on conservative principles. We've always been a moderate country, but always just right of center. We've never been extreme in either direction. And the way we're going now is extreme to the left. And it's one of those things that if you head down that path, you can't go back. So to me, conservatism is the founding principles, and we need to get back to that. We need to believe in the individual. We need to trust the individual. And again, as Eli said, I have to say, he said it very well. It's the government has no power other than that we give to it. So it is an artificial entity created by we the people, and they can't forget that.
Thank you. Lynn?
So I think conservatism and
Liberty.
freedom and
What does liberty mean to you?
Yes, they go hand in hand, and our country was founded, just like both these gentlemen said, on those conservative principles that support family, that support faith, and that support prosperity. And that's up for us as individuals to determine what our own individual prosperity is and what our own individual opportunity is. But the key there is this country it is something that our country does provide for us. Conservatism, though, is also about limited government. It's about government getting out of our way so that we can achieve whatever that personal happiness, whatever that personal prosperity is for us. Like I said, it supports those values that we as Americans and our founding fathers came here to enjoy. So it was to enjoy your faith and to enjoy your family and to enjoy your freedom. And so I think the two go hand in hand. I don't see them as separate entities, but definitely the foundation on which this country was built upon. And, the Democrats are trying to take all of that away from us now, whether it's our liberty and with a bigger government and a government that gets in our way, or whether it's taking away our personal freedoms to exercise our religion. We're seeing it right now, shutting down churches, making sure that people, you can go to a bar, but you can't go to church. And so I think the two go hand in hand. It's the foundation of this nation, and I will certainly go to Congress with the intent to protect both for us.
Thank you, Lynn. Steve?
Thank you, Keith. Conservatism is, in my mind, it's an ideal. We can talk about some of the big things like limited government, free enterprise, the things that the government allows the states to handle, as you heard me talk about before. So I think it's a construct by we here in this country we live by. Liberty is something that you don't know what it is till you don't have it. I lived in a country for 5 years underneath a dictator when I lived overseas in Europe. We take a lot of things of liberty for granted. And it's being challenged right now. If you don't think it's serious, I tell the story. My grandmother was living with us. We were overseas in Spain, and Franco was still the dictator after the Spanish Civil War in the 30s. And this young man, must have been 12 or 13, ran across the plaza and stole 4 oranges. And Franco State Police lifted up his cape with a Uzi submachine gun and killed a young man in the square. Pretty moving for a 10-year-old to see that. And I remember I didn't understand what happened. I went back to my grandmother. We went back to the apartment, and I had to have her explain to me what just happened. It was my first inkling of what liberty isn't. So liberty allows us to do the things that we as individuals desire. It's a God-given liberty. Nobody has the right to take it away from you. And what we're seeing right now is people want to encroach on those liberties that we take for granted. I plead, we need to take this country back. Ann Custer's not doing it for us. Ann Custer's going whatever the prevailing wind is. And that's to take away yours and mine, our liberties. It's what we were founded on, and that's what we need to continue to have. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, and this is kind of timely considering the fact that Pelosi came out today and suggested that perhaps the debates are something that really shouldn't happen anymore. They're pointless, I guess. Starting with Eli, you're on the debate stage in October facing Ann Custer, and you have the opportunity to ask her 3 questions directly. What would those questions be, and what questions do you think she would ask of you?
I would ask her if she wants a future for her children and grandchildren where they have the ability to pursue the American dream. Or does she want a future for her children where they are slaves to this socialism government. I would ask her, how are we going to mend the divide in this country that we just have to turn on the news to see? Or will she continue to allow the far left to divide this nation? Additionally, I would ask her, does she herself truly believe in freedom? Because when she has her voting record, it doesn't very much look to me like she respects the Founding Fathers, that she does not respect the cost that the American patriots have paid for this nation, for their children and grandchildren, for the future of America, and for freedom itself across the globe. I have a feeling that Ann Custer, she'll try to challenge me on my stance on the Second Amendment. However, New Hampshire, live free and die state, one of the states in the nation that is the most willing to provide the Second Amendment to its citizens. I think she might also ask me about my qualifications. Who is this guy? Public school teacher, coming out of nowhere, thinking that he could run for U.S. Congress. To which, why not? Everything the Constitution says, I am eligible for. I believe in a citizens' legislature, the ability for those with the best ideas and the best way to reach out to the people and speak the people's voices getting into power. Because those who respect the people, those who fight for the people, will keep that in mind as they are setting laws and ensuring that we have an America that is allowing liberty and freedom for every American. That's only 2 questions I think she'd ask me because the time says I need to stop. So, third one, we'll talk later.
Thank you, Eli. Matt?
That was smooth. I would ask Annie Custer the first question, what have you done for New Hampshire, really done for New Hampshire? And when was the last time you put the state of New Hampshire's interest above your own? And then the third question I would ask her is if she would voluntarily give up rights to her pension. And I think that, exactly, laugh. Yeah, I would be laughing too. The next thing I would expect to be asked, probably about my qualifications, what makes me think I'm qualified. I would probably tell her I've given a lot for my country, and I feel I have more to give, and I don't feel I'm done. And I really feel that sometimes people have to be tested. Like Seneca said, he's a great Stoic philosopher. He said he pities the people who've never been tested because they really don't know their own worth. So that would be the other question I would expect her to ask, probably be something along the lines of Second Amendment, like Eli said, which they always run to the public security and this, but you know, when you look at the numbers, it plays out that the countries, I mean the cities that have the harshest, most draconian laws are the most dangerous. I mean, there are more people killed in Chicago on a weekend than were killed when I was stationed in Afghanistan, in Kandahar. That's a frightening statistic. 30 seconds. What would she ask me? Third question. I don't know. I'd have to be ready for it. Okay. Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, Matt. Lynn?
Thanks. So the first question I'd ask Ann Custer is, why are you afraid of Nancy Pelosi and why do you run and hide? She stood up on national TV and told everybody in 60 Minutes those two very things. I'm afraid of Nancy Pelosi and I run and hide. What's she afraid of and why does she hide? Actually, where does she hide? I hope it's not the bathroom. So that's my first question. My second question would be, why did you vote to defund our military or to take away funds from our military when I was sitting over in Afghanistan taking care of America's sons and daughters who were bleeding in my arms and I didn't even have sheets to put on their bed? I want an answer. I want to know why she wasn't taking care of us when we were over there taking care of her. That's question number 2. Question number 3, I would ask Ann Custer why she was so busy worrying about trying to impeach our president and going down the witch hunt to impeach our president when we needed the USMCA passed. That was, that was a good piece of legislation that was worth $1.1 billion to the state of New Hampshire and 22,000 jobs. Why didn't she want to force Nancy Pelosi's hand on that? So, and why did she vote against tax reform? Where is she for New Hampshire? So those would be my 3 questions for her. What do I think she'd ask me? Frankly, I don't think she'd ask me anything because I think she'd be scared. Because she says she's scared of everything. So I can't really think of a question she might ask me other than, were you scared when you were in Afghanistan? That might be a question she'd ask me.
Thank you, Lynn. It's a tough act to follow, Steve.
I'm gonna start with what would she ask me, because she asked me these questions the last time I faced her on the stage. She asked me why I was such a staunch pro-life candidate. I didn't shy away from it then. I'm not going to shy away from it now. She asked me an immigration question, which I thought was just ridiculous because I'm the only guy in the race that's 100% Hispanic, and she's a privileged white woman from Hanover, and that was a bad question. I know she'll ask me about that, about what do I believe about illegal immigration and DACA and path to citizenship. And the third one she asked me was about why don't I believe in common sense gun laws? And that's just code for taking away your guns. The 3 things I would ask her, number 1, why did you support a guy by the name of Mayor Pete Buttigieg who wants to dissolve the Electoral College? Seems to me, as a representative from New Hampshire, you should be defending the Electoral College. How do you put your head down at night on a pillow, supposed to be defending us, when you're throwing us underneath the bus? You allow the Democrats to absolve the Electoral College. It was talked about earlier, I think, by Matt. Nobody will ever come back to this state. First in the nation status goes away. Our role in a presidential primary goes away. But yet we have a congresswoman that backed Mayor Pete who wants to get rid of the Electoral College. The other question I ask her is, why did you really feel compelled to impeach our president? I just want to know, what was the abuse of power that you so fundamentally believe that he did? What was it? We all know that she went along with Nancy Pelosi. And let's not forget, Pelosi said, we won't go forward with the impeachment unless it's bipartisan. Well, we know where those numbers ended up. Ann Custer doesn't want to face me again. She doesn't. She may not have a choice. She's got to answer not only to me, she has to answer to you and everybody in the New Hampshire 2nd Congressional District why she is an absentee representative. I can't read that. Oh, stop. I'm kidding. All right, thank you.
To all 4 of our candidates, thank you very much. Each candidate will now have a 2-minute closing argument. We will start with Matt, followed by Lynn, Steve, and then Eli.
First off, I want to thank everyone for being here. It's been an honor and a pleasure to speak with you. I'm going to stay afterwards. I'd like to meet as many of you as I can. I love our country. I won the geographic lottery like we all did by being born here, and it's something that we should cherish, and it's something that can easily go away. And if we're not careful, this election is going to be very, very important. And I will say, there's not a bad choice up here. There's only better choices. I would ask for your support. I feel I have the required knowledge. I have the experience. I've worked when I was deployed overseas, I worked at a very high level. I worked on bilateral agreements between countries. I feel I can bring a lot to this job, and I feel like I could really bring integrity to the office. There's 2 things that are really required: integrity and good judgment. And if you have those 2 things, I think you'll be all right. So I would just ask for your support. I don't want your money. I want your support. I want to get money out of the campaigns. Money is poisoning this country. Corporations do not have the right to vote, but yet corporations have the power of the purse. Corporations are the ones that are influencing all of these candidates, and the only thing they're concerned about is their reelection. We need to stop that. That's the one thing that's happening. It's leading to an internal corruption of our country that we need to stop. So I would say this: term limits are very, very important. Get rid of the pensions for elected officials and stop stop the flow of money to political campaigns. We need to make people accountable. We need to make publicly funded elections something that we should have. We should hold candidates to this strict thing where they're not beholden to special interests because they're selling us out little by little. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. Lynn?
Thank you very much. Well, thank you to the Merrimack County GOP for a great event, and thank you to Keith for being a tremendous moderator. Great job. And thank you to all of you for coming out tonight and sitting out under a tent. It's great to be out and out with no masks, which I love to see. So thank you all for that. So I've spent my entire life running toward the fight. Ann Custer, who says she runs and hides and that she's scared of Nancy Pelosi, that's not me. When I sat over in Afghanistan and I held a bomb in my hand that was strapped to an Afghan woman who was coming in for treatment, I stood strong. I didn't run and hide. And that's exactly what I'll do for all of us in Congress as well. I've also won in difficult seats. I've won in difficult races, and I've been a winner in a difficult race. In 2009 and to 2012, I served in the New Hampshire House, and I was elected as a House of Representatives member in the most liberal district in this state. And I didn't just get elected once, I got elected twice. So I can be elected in a difficult race, and this is just another one of those difficult seats that a person like me can definitely win. But as we get into the primary and definitely into the general election, this is a race about who can beat Ann Custer. We have got to take on Ann Custer. The future of the state of New Hampshire and the future of this country lies, we say it all the time, it's so cliche, right? Like, oh, this is the most important election of our lifetime. But in my lifetime, we have never been on the cusp of socialism like we are now. And so this is an important election, and we've got to get the right candidate to go against Ann Custer. So I'm going to invite all of you guys to join the fight tonight with Lynn. You can go to blankenbecker.com and join the fight with us tonight. We are going to take on Ann Custer, and you all can be part of history because I will be the first female Republican congresswoman from the state of New Hampshire when you guys all elect me. So go to blankenbecker.com, and thank you all. God bless you, and God bless the state of New Hampshire and this great country.
Thank you, Lynn. Steve?
Well, thank you. The first thing I want to do is thank Eli, Matt, and Lynn. This has been cordial and a lot of fun. So thank you very much. And for those of you who don't know, the fact that these two gentlemen are not with Lynn and I on the WMUR stage is wrong. I wrote a letter that was published today in the Union Leader, kind of just letting WMUR let them know that I was disagreeing with their decision. These guys deserve to be on the stage. It's not what we do here in New Hampshire. We're not about picking losers and winners. Everybody has a shot, so it was a privilege for me to share the stage with you guys. So thank you very much. It's very simple. We have a choice. We have a choice on September 8th and even more so on November 3rd. But as I go around telling folks, September 8th is a data point. The most important date after you elect your nominees is September 9th. And let me tell you why. We're not going to win in November if we don't come together on September 9th. That's the most important thing. We're all going to fight. We all believe that we have the right tools and traits to win. Look, I was a nominee last time, 7-way primary. I won. And I've been on the stage with Ann Custer. So I know what it's like to run in a general election. But I'm not going to talk about that. What I'm going to talk about is where we are as a party and what we need to do. You can have the greatest candidate come September 9th, but if we continue to fight amongst each other and if we continue to tear this party apart, it doesn't matter how good the candidate is. So we need to go out and tell people, we got to come together. We got to come together because that's the most important thing. So I want to say thank you very much. You can go to my website, negron4congress.com. Everything's out there. Regardless of what happens in September, I know that I'm going to be there September 9th, helping whoever is the primary winner because that's what we want. It's not about me. It's about getting rid of Ann Custer. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you, Steve. Eli.
I just wanted to say thank you, Steve. It is very cordial. And you point out, I want to thank you personally for writing that letter. But what I would like to ask both of you publicly, if you would, if they do not allow the 4 candidates who are on the ballot, I would ask that you both abstain from partaking in that as a show of solidarity. Would you pledge to do that?
Continue to get them on, not at the exclusion. The fight is to make sure that these 2 guys are both on the stage to be aired on September 3rd. That's the fight.
Right, but what I'm asking is stand on principle right now. That's all. That's all I'm asking.
Can you answer the question?
I'm not prepared to make that until I finish my fight with WMUR.
So I too did reach out to WMUR, and and so we both have been trying to fight this fight for them, and I shouldn't say fight it for you, but be a part of the fight for them, because we do think it's important to have them included. They're fine candidates and they should be included. So to answer your question, I, like Steve, will continue to fight very hard to get you on there, but at the end of the day, the voters are going to have something to distinguish candidates by. And so whether it's WMUR, another opportunity to debate with you, I would, whatever it is, I want to make sure that we, offer you the opportunity just like we've had, and so, but Steve, I don't know about you with your campaign and how do you...
It's a tough question. I'll be honest with you.
It
right?
is
It's
a very tough
question.
question. And, we want to stand with you guys. Yeah. Well,
I know it's not simple, but sometimes on principle, it's important to stand on principle. That's all I'm asking.
no, and I totally understand that, but then we also have an electorate out there that needs to hear from the candidates. So I would offer that we should be able to debate again. And, we still have 11 days. Are we 11 days out? So I'll take a debate every night if we need to do that to make sure you guys get your voices heard.
Thank you. Thank you both. Eli, your closing statement?
Well, before that, whoops, is this on? There we go. Before that, I do just want to say we could always just tell WMUR that we, as the GOP of CD2, did have our debate, a debate hosted by our lovely hosts over here, and this debate, they can re-air it on their system if they want. There you go. There's your CD2 debate, WMUR. That's how the voters can find out about all the candidates. As to my closing statements, I want to ensure that America, as we know it, is able to survive in the future. We've seen what's been happening in our cities. We've seen what the Democrats have called for. We've seen the far militant radicalization that they are willing to promote and not condemn because they want to claim power and bring socialism here to America. As your next congressman, this isn't so much about me. This is about you, the people of CD2, the people who have been deprived of a voice thanks to Ann Custer, the people who, when I speak to you and when I look into your eyes, I see the concern that you have for the future of our nation. All we have to do is turn on the news, see what's being aired, see what's been happening across the nation, and realize this is a fundamental issue that must be resolved. We had a lot of great questions asked of us today, yet all of that will fall by the wayside if we as a nation allow another generation of America's youth to be raised to the socialist indoctrination that the liberals have constructed. We as the GOP, we need to ensure that we are not only worried about this election. Yes, we want to get President Trump reelected. However, we need to look beyond as well. We need to lay the foundation today for what we are going to do for the 2024 election, to ensure that American youth are provided the opportunity to hear both points of view, rather than the overwhelming majority of what they hear being the liberal socialist propaganda. Here in New Hampshire, 40% of the state has decided that they do not align with either the Republicans nor the Democrats. And yet this is despite the fact that over 90% of the media and the news that they consume is the leftist agenda. If we had even slightly more balanced representation, that 40% who say that they do not believe in Republican ideals because of what they're being fed by the corrupt media, they would vote red up and down the ticket, thereby ensuring freedom for the future of America. And that is why I'm running this race. And that is what I will defend as your next congressman. So here at Clemmer for Congress, vote for me if you want liberty. Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Thank you. And I've been asked to make a very, very quick programming announcement that both the Merrimack County GOP as well as YCN Television are going to do their best to make sure that this particular debate is spread as far and as wide as possible. And if it's concern about coverage, and if the decision is made to forego the WMUR debate, that this particular debate here will absolutely be spread. And if we need to do another one, we will do that as well. It's important that the message gets out, but it's important that the message not be controlled by the only major affiliated television station in the entire state. That concludes tonight's New Hampshire Republican 2nd Congressional District Candidates Debate. Special thanks to Eli Clemmer, Matt Bajulabrick, Lynn Blankenbecker, and Steve Negrin. On behalf of the Merrimack County GOP, we wish to thank the Loudon Country Club for hosting us, YCN Television for filming, Andrew Georgievitz for the sound, and for everybody who lent a helping hand to make this possible tonight. Thank you. God bless America. God bless the state of New Hampshire. Have a great night.